She stood at the edge of the briefing table, her hand resting on the cold metal surface. No one had asked her to speak. No one even looked her way. But in her chest, beneath the calm exterior, something was burning. Why was everyone ignoring her when she had seen what they had not? Why did they refuse to hear the one thing she knew could change everything? The air in the room was thick with the smell of coffee gone bitter. Maps sprawled across the table, littered with notes, circles, and red lines. Men's voices overlapped, confident, sharp, restless. Boots scraped on concrete as soldiers shifted, impatient to be told what came next. Orders, targets, timelines. And there she was, silent, almost invisible, a shadow on the edge of their war. But what they didn't know was that their survival already rested in her hands. The commander's voice boomed, rehearsed, authoritative. The route is compromised. The enemy knows we're moving tonight. They've prepared for it. We'll adjust. We'll move faster, stay low. Surprise is still ours. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him the truth. That she had seen the smoke already. That she had heard whispers on the radio waves, faint but certain. That something bigger was waiting, a trap woven so tightly it could strangle them all. But her words had never carried the weight their voices did. A pause, pens clicking, radios hissing, and then the meeting was dismissed. She stepped back as chairs scraped and bodies filed out, her presence barely noticed. Only one man glanced at her, a young private, no older than 20, eyes tired from too many sleepless nights. He offered a faint smile, the kind that asked a question without words. But then he too followed the others, swallowed by the march of boots. She stayed, the room emptied. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Her hand brushed over the map. Her finger traced the red circle they had drawn, the ambush site. They thought they had chosen it, but she knew the enemy had drawn it for them. She could feel the truth in her gut, the way some truths are known not by evidence but by instinct sharpened through scars. Her scars were invisible, not the kind medals honored, not the kind that left clean lines. These were deeper, quieter. A daughter who never answered her last call. A father whose last words had been drowned by artillery thunder. Promises unkept, folded into silence. She had carried all of them here, into this war that had never asked for her, into a role no one believed she deserved. And yet here she was. The sound of distant engines pulled her back. She blinked, steadying herself. Time was short. They would move soon, blind to the truth, blind to the smoke that already rose in the distance. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Outside, the air was cold. Dust swirled in the dying light. The convoy sat restless, engines rumbling, exhaust fumes blending with the smell of sand and oil. Soldiers checked weapons, adjusted helmets, muttered jokes that sounded more like prayers. Every small sound carried weight, the click of a rifle bolt, the shuffle of gear, the nervous cough someone tried to hide. She moved quietly among them, unnoticed but watchful. The young private caught her eye again. He was fumbling with his radio, frustration on his face. She crouched beside him, her voice low. "Check the frequency again. It's not stable." He glanced up, surprised she had spoken, but he obeyed, adjusting the dial. The static cleared, faint voices emerging foreign, sharp, coded. His eyes widened. "You hear that?" She nodded. The words weren't clear, but the intent was. They weren't alone. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Don't say anything, not yet." The private swallowed, nodding. Something in her tone carried a weight he trusted. For a moment she felt seen. The convoy rolled out, wheels grinding on gravel, headlights cutting through the darkening horizon. She sat in the rear, her rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning the ridgelines that hemmed them in. Every shadow looked sharper, every silence louder. The men talked about home, about football scores, about women waiting for them. They spoke as if words could shield them from fear. She said nothing. She had learned that silence could be armor too. The road narrowed, the cliffs rose, and the smoke she had seen earlier thickened on the wind. Her breath slowed, Her grip tightened on the rifle. She counted heartbeats, listening. Then in the distance, a glint, small, almost nothing, but she saw it, a reflection where there should be none. Her body moved before thought. She slammed her hand on the side of the vehicle, voice breaking the air. "Stop now." The driver jerked, confused. The commander in the front turned, anger flashing. What the hell? But then the first explosion hit. The earth roared. Fire swallowed the road. The lead vehicle disappeared in a thunderclap of dust and flame. Men screamed. Metal tore apart like paper. The convoy skidded, brakes screaming. Another blast. The rear vehicle flipped, rolling into the ditch. Chaos erupted. Bullets cracked through the smoke, sharp, merciless. Muzzle flashes lit the cliffs. Shadows moved above, precise, waiting. The trap had sprung. She pressed herself low, the heat of the blast burning her face, her ears ringing. Around her, soldiers scrambled, shouting orders, firing blind into the smoke. The commander's voice tried to cut through the chaos, but the enemy had already written this script. She pulled the private down beside her just as another burst of fire tore through where he had been standing. His eyes were wide, terrified. He was too young for this. They all were. Her hand steadied his trembling grip on the rifle. She locked eyes with him. "Breathe, focus on me." It was strange, the calm in her voice, when inside she was burning. But she had lived through worse. She had seen worse. And she knew if she gave in to the fear, so would he. So she held steady, for him, for all of them. Minutes bled into eternity. The fight raged. Smoke choked the air, fire painted the night. Men fell, orders fractured. And still she moved with a clarity no one else carried. She pulled one man from the burning wreckage, dragged another to cover. Her hands bled, her breath ragged, but her focus unbroken. And when her rifle finally spoke, one shot, clean, deliberate, the glint on the ridge vanished. The sniper was gone. The commander staggered past, shouting, bleeding from his arm. His eyes met hers just for a second. Something in his face changed. Not gratitude, not yet, but recognition. The tide began to shift, slowly, painfully. The smoke thinned, the firing ebbed. The enemy withdrew, fading into the cliffs. Silence returned, heavy, broken only by the crackle of fire and the moans of the wounded. The road was a graveyard now. Vehicles twisted, blackened, bodies still, lives cut short. She stood, chest heaving, rifle heavy in her hands. The men around her looked at her differently now. Not as a shadow, not as someone invisible, but as the one who had seen what they hadn't. The young private sat against the rubble, shaking, alive only because she had pulled him down. His lips moved, whispering something she almost couldn't hear. "You saved me." Her throat tightened. She looked away. She hadn't saved everyone, she never could. But she knew this. If she hadn't spoken, if she hadn't forced them to stop, none of them would have survived. And yet she said nothing. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply acts. And somewhere beneath the smoke and silence, a new war was already waiting. How do you measure the silence after chaos? For some it was the ringing in their ears. For others the crackle of fire chewing through wreckage. But for her it was the faces. Faces staring into nothing. Faces pressed into the dirt. Faces she would never see blink again. She walked slowly among them, her boots crunching glass, metal, bone. Smoke curled upward like black ribbons into the night, a bitter perfume of oil and blood staining the air. The convoy was broken. The mission shattered before it began. And yet somehow, against the fire and steel, they still breathed. Some of them. The commander barked orders to regroup, his voice raw with pain and fury. Medics scrambled, hands red, bandages soaked before they touched skin. The wounded groaned, their cries muffled by grit and exhaustion. Soldiers staggered, carrying the weight of loss heavier than any pack on their shoulders. She dropped to her knees beside the young private. He was pale, clutching his rifle like it was the only thing tethering him to this world. His chest rose in shallow bursts, his lips trembling. She pressed her hand on his shoulder. "You're alive," she whispered, though her own voice cracked. "Stay with me." He nodded weakly, eyes darting to the bodies nearby. Fear rooted deep in him now, the kind that grows like vines and never lets go. She knew that fear well. She had lived with it for years. Her gaze drifted upward to the ridgeline where she had seen the sniper's glint. Shadows lingered still, but retreat had swallowed them. They were gone for now, watching perhaps, waiting. And yet she couldn't shake the weight pressing against her ribs. The attack had been precise, too precise. They had known. The convoy's timing, the route, even the spacing between vehicles. Someone had told them. But who? She stood scanning the men, their exhaustion, their pain. Suspicion coiled in her chest. It wasn't just bad luck. It never was. The commander limped toward her, his sleeve torn, blood dried against his skin. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Not gratitude, not anger, something heavier. "You saw it before anyone else," he said finally. His voice was low, almost reluctant. She didn't answer, words weren't needed. He exhaled, shoulders slumping, and looked at the fire chewing through a vehicle, its flames licking the night sky. "We were supposed to move under cover, take them off guard. Instead, we lost half our men before we fired a shot." His jaw tightened. He turned back to her. "How did you know?" Her chest rose and fell. She could have told him. About the intercepted radio, about the smoke on the horizon, about the instincts sharpened through wounds no one else could see. But would it matter? Would he believe her now when he hadn't before? She met his eyes. "I just knew." For a moment, silence. Then he nodded curt, like a man forced to acknowledge something he couldn't explain away. "Get some rest. We move at first light." "Rest?" She almost laughed. How does one rest in the shadow of fresh graves? They made camp on the edge of the wreckage, no choice but to linger among the dead until dawn. Fires burned low, casting fractured shadows. Men whispered, voices brittle, stories fraying in the dark. Someone hummed a song under his breath, a lullaby maybe, carried from home, broken here by war. She sat apart, her rifle across her knees, her eyes never still. Sleep didn't come easy for her, not here, not anywhere. And as she stared into the fire, memory found her. The hospital room. White walls, sterile light, the faint beep of machines keeping rhythm where a heartbeat once lived strong. Her daughter, skin pale, eyes too tired for someone so young. She remembered holding that tiny hand, fragile and warm, as if it might slip away if she blinked. "I'll be back before you know it," she had whispered, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Stay strong for me, just a little longer." Her daughter's lips had curled in the faintest smile, though her eyes had already clouded with exhaustion. And then the machines, the alarms, the silence after. The silence had followed her here, to the desert, to the cliffs, to this fire. She blinked hard, the flames blurring before her. Her chest ached, but she breathed slow, quiet. No one here knew, no one could. It wasn't medals or duty that had carried her to this war. It was grief. It was guilt. It was a promise broken too soon. And perhaps, somewhere inside, it was redemption she sought, not victory. The private approached, limping, his face pale but determined. He sat beside her, awkward, unsure if he belonged. His voice was small when he spoke. "Back there, if you hadn't pulled me down, I'd be gone." She didn't look at him. The fire crackled, filling the space between them. "You don't owe me anything," she said. He shook his head. "That's not true. I do. All of us do." Her eyes finally met his. They were young eyes, untested, still carrying the faintest hope the war hadn't burned out. He reminded her of someone herself once, before silence claimed her. He swallowed, gaze falling to the fire. "I used to think being out here was about proving myself, showing I wasn't afraid. But tonight, I've never been so scared in my life." She said nothing, she just listened. He exhaled, shaky. "Does that fear ever go away?" Her chest tightened. She thought of her daughter's hand in hers, of the hospital's silence, of the men she had dragged through fire tonight only to leave others behind. "No," she said softly, "it never does." He stared at her, waiting for more, but she let the silence sit, because sometimes truth was enough even when it hurt. At dawn they buried the fallen. No speeches, no ceremony, just dirt, stone, and silence. Helmets rested on rifles, a prayer murmured by one man too broken to finish. The sun rose slow, indifferent to grief. She stood apart again, watching as the earth swallowed their dead. The commander's face was granite, unreadable. The private's eyes shone with unshed tears. Others stared hollow into the ground, as if trying to bury their own pain with the bodies. She clenched her fists, for each man lowered, a question sharpened: who had betrayed them? Because it wasn't chance. She was certain. Someone had spoken, someone among them or close enough to touch them had given away their lives. And she would find out who. The march resumed, slow, heavy. They moved like ghosts now, each step dragging the memory of the ambush with it. The desert stretched endless, heat already rising, air dry as bone. Boots scuffed, radios cracked, silence filled the gaps. She scanned every ridge, every shadow, her rifle never far from her grip. But her eyes weren't just searching for enemies now. They searched the men beside her, their faces, their movements, looking for cracks, looking for truths unspoken. The private walked near her, closer now, as if her presence steadied him. The commander kept glancing her way, a question in his eyes he never voiced. Others, too, watched her differently, respect edging past doubt. But it didn't matter, not yet. Because deep inside she knew something they didn't. The ambush wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And in the distance, where heat shimmered against stone and sky, smoke still rose. Not from what they had left behind, but from what waited ahead. What kept them walking forward. Not hope. Hope had been buried with the men they lost. Not orders either. Orders were just words, and words could not carry boots across miles of stone and heat. What carried them was weight. The weight of duty, the weight of silence, the weight of ghosts trailing behind every step. The desert stretched merciless, endless shades of brown and gold, the horizon shimmering under the sun's cruel eye. Heat waves danced like mirages, promising water where there was none, safety where there would never be any. Dust clung to their tongues, their throats, their lungs. Sweat dried before it fell. She walked near the middle of the column, rifle at the ready, her eyes never resting. Every rise in the land, every crack in the stone, every shadow flickering at the edge of vision, she read them like scripture. Danger could hide in anything, and often did. The private trudged beside her, slower today, each step heavier. He tried not to show the limp, but she saw it. She always saw the things people wanted to hide. "You should fall back," she said quietly without looking at him. "I can keep up." His voice was strained, too fast, as if convincing himself more than her. She glanced at him, then at his hands, gripping the rifle too tightly. He was shaking, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. "Don't break yourself trying to prove something," she murmured. "The desert doesn't care about pride." He gave her a small, tight smile. "Neither do you, huh?" For a moment her lips almost curved. Almost. But instead she looked forward again, silence returning as her only answer. They stopped at midday, under the meager shade of a jagged outcrop. The men dropped packs, water canteens passed from hand to hand. Silence hung over them, broken only by the dry coughs and the metallic click of weapons checked again and again. The commander moved among them, speaking in low tones, checking wounds, counting heads. His eyes fell on her once, pausing, as if he still didn't know what to make of her. She sat apart, back against the stone, her gaze sweeping the horizon. The desert hummed with stillness, but her gut told her it was a lie. The kind of silence that waits before teeth sink in. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the scar on her ribs, hidden beneath layers of fabric. A wound from another life, another mission. She remembered the night it happened, how the bullet had torn through flesh, how she had laid bleeding in a field miles from safety. She remembered the voices of men arguing whether to leave her behind. She had survived not because they carried her, but because she refused to die where she was not wanted. And since that night she had known trust was fragile, sometimes fatal. The private sat beside her again, his face damp with sweat, his breath shallow. For a while he didn't speak. Then his voice broke the silence, hesitant. "They keep looking at each other," he whispered. Her eyes flicked toward him. "The men," he clarified, "like they're waiting for someone to say something, like they don't trust." His voice trailed. He didn't finish. But he didn't need to. She knew. The question had already rooted itself inside her too. Someone had betrayed them. And the silence between them all was thickening into suspicion. When they moved again, the commander called her forward. He waited until the others walked ahead, then spoke in a low voice. "You're watching them." She didn't answer. "So am I," he said, his jaw tight. "That ambush, it wasn't random. Someone gave us away." Her eyes narrowed. He had admitted it at last. But then he added, "I need you to understand something. If word spreads among the men, it'll break them. They can't fight an enemy out there." He nodded toward the ridgeline, "and in here at the same time." She said nothing. She understood too well. The commander studied her for a moment, then his tone shifted, quieter. "I don't know why you came here, why you fight like you do, but I know one thing, you're not like them. You see things differently, and right now I need that." Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to hearing words that resembled trust, not anymore. But before she could reply, the desert answered for her. A shot rang out, sharp, echoing off stone. The column dropped instantly, men scrambling for cover. Dust exploded where the bullet struck, too close to the private's head. He froze, breath caught, eyes wide. She dragged him down before the second shot cracked. "Snipers!" Again. The cliffs came alive with fire. Bullets snapped through the air, ricocheting off stone, slamming into sand. The men fired back, blind, their rifles spitting heat into the shimmering heights. She pressed herself low, her eyes scanning, searching, reading the land like she always had, and then she saw it. A shimmer, a figure sliding between rocks, precise, hidden. Her rifle was already rising, breath slowing, heartbeat steadying. The world narrowed to a scope, a trigger, a breath. The shot broke the desert. The figure collapsed, tumbling down the rocks. But the silence didn't return, not yet. Because there were more. The firefight dragged on, minutes stretched into years. Dust filled lungs. Heat scorched skin. Men screamed, cried, cursed. One by one, shadows fell, but not before they took pieces of the convoy with them. When it was over, when the last echo faded, the desert seemed to exhale again. Stillness returned, but not the same stillness as before. This one was heavier. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving, sweat carving lines through the dust on her face. Around her, men counted losses, dragging the wounded, whispering names of the dead. The commander approached, face grim. His eyes flicked from the ridgeline to her. "That's twice now. They knew where we'd be. They knew when." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He already knew. Night fell heavy. They made camp without fire, silence their only shield. Men spoke in hushed tones, fear bleeding into anger, anger twisting into suspicion. She sat with her rifle, eyes sweeping the shadows beyond camp. The private sat near her, restless, his hands trembling as he cleaned his weapon. Finally, he whispered, "Do you think it's one of us?" She didn't look at him. "What do you think?" He swallowed hard, gaze falling to the dirt. I don't know who to trust anymore." She almost told him the truth. That trust was a luxury no soldier could afford. That trust was what got you killed. But instead, she stayed silent, watching the horizon where no stars shone. Because somewhere out there, smoke was rising again, and she knew it wasn't just from enemy fires. It was from betrayal, burning them from the inside. Later, when the camp finally quieted, she lay awake, eyes open to the dark. Sleep teased others, but not her. In the silence, memories returned again. The phone call she never answered, the voice message left unheard until it was too late. Her daughter's voice, faint, tired, waiting for her to pick up. "Mom, are you there?" Her throat tight, she squeezed her eyes shut, but the sound wouldn't leave, it never did. That was why she fought. Not for medals, not for country, for redemption she would never hold, for forgiveness she would never hear. And maybe, for silence to finally mean peace, not regret. Dawn came cold, cruel. They moved again, slower, now weaker. Each man carried suspicion in his pack, heavier than any weapon. She felt it too, a gaze lingering too long, a whisper cut short when she walked by. The betrayal was alive among them, poisoning everything. But she didn't let it show. She just kept walking, kept scanning, kept breathing. Because she knew, whatever waited ahead, smoke or silence, bullet or betrayal, she would face it. Alone if she had to. And somewhere, deep inside, she wondered, how many of them would still be alive when the truth finally came out? How do you look into a man's eyes and wonder if he wants you dead? That was the air they walked through now. Not just heat, not just exhaustion, suspicion. Every glance lingered too long. Every silence weighed too heavy. Every word spoken carried a second meaning, sharp as barbed wire. They moved in a column across barren flats, the horizon stretching endless in every direction. No cliffs this time, no ridges, just open ground. Safety, the commander called it, but she knew better. The desert never gave safety. It only gave time. Her boots pressed into sand hardened by sun, each step a drumbeat of memory. The ambush, the sniper fire, the voices that hadn't been theirs on the radio. Betrayal whispered through her head. Someone had spoken. Someone among them, or close enough to touch them, had given the enemy everything. And the thought cut deeper than any bullet. They halted near a dry riverbed, the commander raising his fist. Men dropped to knees, scanning, weapons ready. Dust swirled in small eddies, the only sound the rasp of breath, the click of metal. She crouched low, eyes sweeping. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind, just silence. She hated silence. The commander moved to her side, voice low. "We're splitting for water. Half move west, half stay here. Quick in, quick out. You take lead with the second group." She looked at him, narrowing her eyes. "You trust me with them." His jaw tightened. "I trust you more than most right now." It wasn't praise, it was survival. She nodded once, said nothing. The private fell in beside her again, too close, as if her shadow meant safety. He kept glancing at the others, faces drawn, lips dry, eyes sharp. When they split, she led her group into the riverbed. Sand crunched beneath their boots. The air grew heavier, as if the desert itself held its breath. She felt it before she saw it, that shift in the world, that pause in the air. And then movement. Shots cracked from the ridge. Sand erupted, bullets tearing into stone. Her men dove for cover, curses filling the air. She slammed against the wall of the riverbed, dragging the private down beside her. "Stay low," she hissed, scanning the ridgeline. But something was wrong, too wrong. The fire wasn't scattered, it wasn't wild. It was targeted, surgical. They knew exactly where to aim. And in her gut, the truth settled cold. They had been led into it again. She returned fire, her rifle steady, her breath slow. Each shot a lifeline thrown into the chaos. Around her, men scrambled, shouting, firing blind. The private clutched his weapon, firing in bursts too quick, too panicked. She pressed her hand against his rifle, forcing him to slow. "Breathe," she ordered, eyes never leaving the scope. "One shot, one life, don't waste it." He nodded, shaky, his trust folding into her calm. The fight dragged, echoes bouncing off stone, dust-filled lungs, sun-seared eyes, but slowly, painfully they pushed back. Shadows fell, silence crawled back in. And when the last echo faded, she lowered her rifle. Too many gone, again. The men looked at each other, eyes narrowed, fear coiled into anger. One soldier spat into the dirt. "This isn't bad luck, someone's selling us out." Another snapped back, "You think it's one of us." The words spread like fire. Whispers turned to accusations. Eyes darted, fingers twitched near triggers. She felt the air splintering. The worst enemy wasn't on the ridgeline. It was here, among them. She stood, her voice cutting through. Enough. They froze, surprised. She rarely spoke more than a word at a time. But her eyes swept them now, hard, unblinking. Fight each other and you won't last the night. That's what they want. Don't give it to them. The silence that followed was brittle, but it held, for now. That night the commander called her aside. His face was carved from stone, his voice rough. "They're breaking, you can feel it." She nodded. "They need someone to blame." His eyes locked on hers. "And they'll look at you first." Her chest tightened. He wasn't wrong. She was the outsider, the one who spoke little, who carried shadows no one understood. It would be easy to paint her as the ghost in their midst. She crossed her arms, her voice steady. "Let them. If their anger keeps them alive another day, I can carry it." His expression shifted, something like respect but laced with pity. "That's not a burden anyone should carry alone." She looked away. "I've carried worse." And in the silence that followed, she thought of her daughter's voice again. "Mom, are you there?" She swallowed hard. No, she hadn't been, not when it mattered. That was why she carried it now. Later she sat alone at the edge of camp, rifle across her knees. The desert stretched endless before her, shadows swallowing the horizon. The private crept up quietly, sitting beside her, his presence hesitant. "They don't trust each other anymore," he whispered. "I can see it in their eyes." She didn't look at him. "You feel it too." He nodded. "I don't know who to believe." Silence stretched, then his voice cracked. Do you think it could be me?" Her head turned sharply, eyes locking on him. His face was pale, his eyes wet with something like fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of being seen as the reason others did. She held his gaze, reading him the way she read landscapes, his breath uneven, his hands trembling, his eyes raw. "No," she said quietly. Relief washed over his face, but only for a moment. She added, "But someone wants you to believe it could be. That's how betrayal works. It rots you from the inside until you don't know yourself anymore." His throat bobbed. He said nothing. And together they stared into the dark, where the silence waited with teeth bared. Dawn came brittle. They moved again, slower now, suspicion woven into every step. She felt it, the stares, the whispers. She knew the weight of being the outsider, the silent one, the one who carried truths no one wanted to face. And she knew what came next. At some point, suspicion would find a target. And she wondered, when it did, would she be the one standing or the one buried in silence? The desert has a way of stripping men down to their bones. Not just their bodies, burned by sun, carved by thirst, but their trust, their patience, their humanity. By the 5th day after the ambush, the men were raw nerves in boots. Every sound was too loud, every silence too sharp, every shadow too long. And the looks, they had changed. Eyes no longer scanned only the horizon, they scanned each other. It began with a canteen. One soldier found his half empty when he swore he'd filled it the night before. His voice cut through camp like a blade. "Which one of you touched my gear?" The others turned, shoulders stiff, hands near rifles. The commander tried to smother it with authority. "Enough, we have water, nobody's stealing." But suspicion doesn't die when told. It grows in silence. The soldier's eyes slid to the private, young, nervous, always hovering near someone else's pack. "You," he spat, "you think we don't see you creeping around?" The private stammered, shaking his head, his voice breaking. I didn't." And before he could finish, A fist cracked across his jaw. Chaos erupted, men shouting, shoving, accusations flying like shrapnel. She moved without thinking, slamming her body between them, her voice slicing the noise. "Stop!" But her word wasn't enough anymore. One of the older soldiers turned on her, eyes narrowed. "Why defend him, unless you're in on it too?" The words dropped like a stone in still water. All heads turned. Her silence had always been a shield. Now it was painted as a mask. The commander forced order back with shouted threats, rifles lowered reluctantly. But the fracture was carved deep. That night the camp didn't sleep. Men sat in separate clusters, backs turned, eyes darting. Trust, once their armor, was now their enemy. She sat apart, rifle across her knees, watching, listening. The private approached again, lips split, shame burning in his eyes. "They're going to kill me," he whispered. She didn't answer at first. Her hands moved automatically, checking her weapon, counting rounds. It calmed her, focused her. Finally she said, "Not if you keep breathing." His voice cracked. "What if it is me? What if I don't even know?" She turned her head sharply, eyes pinning him. "Don't let them write your story for you. That's what betrayal does. It convinces the innocent they're guilty." He swallowed hard, nodding, though doubt still clung to him like sweat. The next day, the desert gave them another test. They moved through broken stone, shadows stretching long under a pale sky. The land looked empty, but she felt it, the shift, the wrongness. A glint on a far ridge, a shimmer in still air. And then fire. The enemy rose from the rocks, rifles cracking, bullets biting dirt. Her men scattered, returning fire, cursing, shouting. But it wasn't the ambush that shook her this time. It was the speed of it, the precision. Someone had told them their path, again. She dropped behind a boulder, rifle steady, eyes hunting targets. But her mind wasn't only on the scope, it was on the men behind her. Because she realized, the ambush wasn't meant to kill them all. It was meant to bleed trust dry, to turn suspicion into certainty. And it was working. When the fight ended, the ground was littered with brass and silence. The men gathered, faces hard, eyes sharper than knives. One soldier, the same who had thrown the first punch, stepped forward, finger stabbing toward the private. "It's him every time. Wherever he goes, they find us." The private's voice broke, desperate. "I swear it's not me." "Shut up," the soldier roared, rifle jerking up. The air froze. Hands twitched toward weapons. Voices shouted over each other. The commander barked orders, but his authority cracked against the roar of paranoia. And then the soldier turned his rifle, not just on the private, but on her. "You defend him because you're both working them against us. How much are they paying you to lead us into the dirt?" The accusation hit like a bullet. Her silence, once strength, once mystery, now painted her guilty. The camp seemed to lean in, waiting. She didn't raise her rifle, didn't flinch. She let the man see her eyes, steady and unblinking. "If I wanted you dead," she said quietly, "you'd already be buried." The words slid into the silence like a knife, cold, honest. The soldier's jaw clenched, his finger twitching on the trigger. The commander stepped between them, voice like thunder. "Enough! Point that rifle again and I'll put you down myself." Reluctantly, the man lowered his weapon, but his eyes never left hers. Neither did the others. That night she sat apart again, the weight of their stares heavy as stone. The commander approached, crouching beside her. His voice was low, raw. "They're close to breaking. One spark and they'll turn on each other." She didn't look at him, or on me. His silence was answer enough. Finally he said, "If you know something, anything, you need to speak, before suspicion eats us alive." Her jaw tightened. She thought of the whispers she'd overheard, the patterns she'd seen, the way the enemy moved as if guided by an invisible hand. She had pieces, not proof. And her silence, her discipline, had always been her weapon. But now that weapon cut both ways. She met his eyes steady. Not yet. His frustration flared, but he didn't press. Maybe he knew pressing her never worked. But she saw it in him, the doubt, even in him. Later, alone in the dark, she pulled the small recorder from her pocket, the one voice she allowed herself to keep. Her daughter's words crackled through the static. "Mom, are you there?" Her throat tightened, her eyes burned. "I'm here," she whispered into the silence, though no one would ever hear it. And she realized this was the edge. Not of the desert, not of survival, but of herself. How much longer could she hold silence before it killed more than it saved? The next morning, when the sun bled over the horizon, she saw it in their faces. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were wolves circling, hungry for someone to blame. And she knew, before the next sunset, one of them would be dead. The only question was, who? The breaking point never arrives with warning. It comes in whispers, in sidelong glances, in the quiet decision of tired men who have stopped believing in tomorrow. By the sixth day, they had run out of patience before they ran out of rations. And she felt it, the way one feels thunder before lightning. The ground underfoot trembled, not from tanks or aircraft, but from the storm building inside her own camp. The commander called a halt near the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse. The desert swallowed it years ago, leaving only fractured walls and a broken roof that groaned in the wind. The men set down their packs, movements clipped, sharp. Nobody spoke unless necessary. The silence was no longer discipline, it was venom. She leaned her rifle against the wall and scanned the horizon. Flat earth, dead trees, too still. Behind her, voices rose. "You saw it. He's the one, always him. We keep him alive, we die." She turned. The private, barely more than a boy, was on his knees, hands bound with cord. His face was bruised from the last beating. His lips moved, but the words came out broken, drowned under the accusations around him. The soldier who'd led the charge before, the one with the scar across his cheek, shoved him forward, eyes wild. "Today it ends," he growled. "We're done bleeding because of him." The commander stepped in, hand raised. "Stand down. Nobody dies without proof." But the scarred soldier spat in the dust. "Proof is lying in graves behind us. You want more." Others muttered, nodding. Fingers brushed triggers. The air was no longer air. It was gunpowder waiting for a spark. She felt her own body move before her mind caught up. One step, then another, until she was standing between the boy and the barrel of the scarred soldier's rifle. Her presence cracked the moment. He sneered, "Move, you're the only reason he's still breathing." Her eyes locked on his. "Then you'll have to shoot through me." The silence after that was heavier than gunfire. Around them men shifted, uncertain, some with shame, others with anger. The commander's voice cut low, strained. "Enough of this. We're soldiers, not executioners." But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. The scarred soldier lowered his rifle a fraction, his lip curled. "Then say it. Why protect him, unless you know something?" Her chest rose, fell. She heard her daughter's voice in her memory, soft through static. "Mom, are you there?" And she knew. Silence had carried her this far, but silence now would bury them all. She breathed once, deep. And then she spoke. "They know because we told them," she said, her voice steady but low. The words didn't fall like bombs. They bled into the cracks, filling every man's ear, pulling every gaze to her. The scarred soldier barked a laugh. "So you admit it, you're the traitor." "No," she cut him off sharp. "Not me, one of us." Murmurs rippled, faces tightened. She kept her eyes on him. "Think about it. They weren't ambushes, they were traps, laid exactly where we walked, exactly when we were weakest. Someone inside is feeding them, and it isn't the boy." Her words carved through the camp like a scalpel. The scarred soldier's jaw clenched. His rifle wavered. And then from the back of the group another voice spoke, rough, hollow. Then who? She let the silence stretch, heavy as iron. She couldn't point yet, not without certainty, but she could aim suspicion away from the innocent. Her gaze swept over them slowly, every scar, every twitch, every flicker of guilt. Ask yourselves, she said, who keeps pushing blame fastest, who shouts the loudest when doubt creeps in. The guilty don't hide in shadows, they hide in noise. Her words hung, dangerous, turning the suspicion like a blade in the room. The scarred soldier stiffened, eyes burning. You think it's me? She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The silence did it for her. The private's sobs cut the tension. He looked up at her, hope flickering like a dying flame. Please, he whispered, please don't let them. Quiet, the commander snapped, but his voice cracked. His men were slipping through his hands. The scarred soldier snarled, stepping closer, rifle raised again. Talk all you want, he hissed, but out here words don't keep you alive. Action does, and my action is ending this now. His finger brushed the trigger. And she moved. Her rifle was in her hands before the thought had finished forming. Not raised, not pointed, just there steady, alive. Her voice cut cold through the heat. Do it, and I'll put you down before your bullet leaves the barrel. The men froze. Even the wind seemed to stop. 2 soldiers, 2 rifles, 1 heartbeat between them. The commander's voice broke the standoff, hoarse and ragged. Enough. He shoved himself between them, hands spread. You want to kill each other. Do it after I'm dead. The scarred soldier's chest heaved, his jaw locked, and slowly, painfully, he lowered his rifle. But his eyes told her this wasn't over. That night the camp sat in poisoned silence. No fire, no stories, just shadows. She lay awake, listening to every shift, every breath, every click of a rifle bolt checked in the dark. Her thoughts spun. Had she saved the boy or only delayed his execution? Had she spoken enough or not nearly enough? Her fingers brushed the recorder in her pocket. Her daughter's voice was there waiting, but she didn't play it. Not tonight. She was afraid the sound of innocence would break her. Sometime near dawn, a sound cut through the stillness. Not gunfire, not shouting. A scream. She was on her feet instantly, rifle raised, sprinting toward it. The private's tent. Empty cord on the ground, blood in the dirt. The boy was gone. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her face remained stone. She looked at the men, wide-eyed, tense, half out of their tents, some shocked, some not. And she knew. The betrayal wasn't a whisper anymore. It was here. Inside their camp. Closer than ever. The sun rose red. A blood-colored dawn bleeding across a dead sky. She stood at the edge of camp, staring at the tracks in the dirt. One set of boots dragged, the stride uneven, like someone pulled against their will. The private hadn't run, he'd been taken. The men gathered behind her, restless, eyes darting. Some looked stricken, others looked satisfied, but none admitted a thing. She crouched, brushing her fingers against the earth. The prints were fresh, leading toward the ridge, toward silence. She rose, rifle slung tight. We move. The commander nodded, though the weight in his eyes told her he knew what she did. Not all of them were hunting to rescue. Some were hunting to finish the job. The march was quiet, too quiet. Boots scuffed against stone, packs creaked, rifles clinked faintly. But no voices, no jokes, not even curses. Suspicion had eaten words alive. She kept to the rear, eyes scanning not just the horizon but their shoulders, their hands, their shadows. Someone here carried the desert in their chest, dry, cold, faithless. They found him at midday. The private was tied to a post at the edge of a ravine, hands bound behind him, lips split, one eye swollen shut. Blood had dried against his chin, but he still breathed. His head lifted when he saw them, hope cracking through pain. And then he froze, because one soldier had a rifle already raised. The scarred one, always him. The boy's breath hitched, his voice was sandpaper. Please, no. The scarred soldier didn't look at him, his eyes were on her. This ends now, he said. The longer he breathes, the more of us die. The commander barked, put it down. But the scarred soldier cut him off, finger tight on the trigger. Don't you see, he's not a soldier, he's bait. They left him alive for a reason. We take him back and they follow. The men shifted uneasily. His words weren't madness, they had weight. And for the first time she saw it, some of them were agreeing. She stepped forward, slow, steady. Her rifle stayed lowered, but her voice was steel. You've been shouting blame since this began, always pointing, always loud. You want him dead not because he's guilty, but because you are. The scarred soldier's jaw locked, his finger twitched on the trigger. Careful, he hissed. Accusations cut both ways. Her breath slowed. Her world narrowed to his face, his rifle, the boy tied to the post. Then prove me wrong, she said softly. Shoot me instead. The words hit harder than bullets. The men stirred, voices sharp. The commander swore. But she held his gaze, unblinking. If you're innocent, you don't need to kill a boy. You can kill me, the one who's been in your way, the one who sees you. The silence that followed was raw, jagged. The scarred soldier's breathing grew heavy, his hands trembled, and in his eyes fear. Not of her, but of being seen. Then a sound cracked the stillness. Not his rifle. Another shot. From the ridge. Dirt exploded at his feet, and he stumbled back, cursing. She spun, rifle raised, eyes snapping to the rocks above. Figures moved there, shadows with rifles, the enemy watching, waiting. The trap had sprung. But it wasn't the boy who was bait. It was all of them. Gunfire rained. Bullets tore the air, whining past ears, chipping stone. The units scattered, diving for cover, returning fire blindly. She dragged the private down behind the post, knife flashing to cut his bonds. He gasped, hands shaking, blood soaking through her sleeve where his fingers clung. They knew, he whispered broken. They knew we'd come. She didn't answer. She couldn't, because her eyes were on the scarred soldier. He hadn't fired at the ridge. His rifle swung low, close, watching them, not the enemy, them. And in that second she knew. He wasn't just angry, he wasn't just loud. He was theirs. She lunged. Her shoulder slammed into him just as his rifle swung toward the commander's back. The shot cracked wide, sparking stone. They hit the ground, rolling, dust choking her throat. His fists were iron, his rage molten. You should have stayed quiet, he snarled, spittle flying. Her knife was in her hand, his weight crushing her chest. The world narrowed to his face, his breath the choice. Around them gunfire thundered, men shouted, the ridge spat death. But here, now, it was only survival. Her blade flashed. Once, then silence. His body went limp, heavy still. She shoved him off, chest heaving, dust and blood thick in her mouth. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then it roared back, gunfire, screams, orders shouted through chaos. But the real sound was inside her. The silence after a man's last breath. The fight dragged on, brutal and close. They clawed for ground inch by inch, until the ridge fell silent, the enemy retreating into the wasteland. The survivors slumped in the dirt, chests heaving, eyes hollow. Nobody looked at her blade. Nobody spoke of the scarred soldier lying still in the dust. But they all knew. And she knew too. Sometimes betrayal isn't uncovered, it's cut out. That night she sat apart again, the recorder pressed to her lips. Her daughter's voice flickered faint. Mom, are you there? Her throat closed, she wanted to answer, to tell her she'd come home, that she'd made it, that silence hadn't cost her everything. But the words wouldn't come. Because tonight, She wasn't sure if silence had saved them, or if it had already destroyed her. The commander came, dropping heavy beside her. His face was carved stone, lit by moonlight. "You were right," he said, voice rough. "It was him." She didn't look at him. Right doesn't bring back the dead. For a long while they said nothing. The desert whispered, cold and endless. Finally he spoke again. "Tomorrow we move. If there's a chance left, it's the last one." She nodded once, eyes fixed on the horizon. Because she knew tomorrow wasn't just a march. It was the end of something. Her silence, her burden, her story. And when the smoke rose again, she would walk through it carrying their final chance. Dawn came without mercy. A pale sun clawing its way through the desert haze, casting long shadows over men who had run out of both sleep and forgiveness. There were fewer now, too few. And yet the mission wasn't done. The commander stood in the ruin of their camp, his voice rough, stripped of command but still holding weight. "One chance left. We take the relay station, we cut their eyes, we get out, or we die out here. No second option." No one argued. They were past that. She sat apart, hands wrapping the stock of her rifle, the blade she'd driven into betrayal still tucked clean at her belt. The silence around her was no longer suspicion. It was something worse, reverence, fear. They'd seen her kill one of their own to keep them alive. And some wounds don't stitch. They moved at first light. The desert stretched endless, heat rising off the earth in trembling waves. Their boots sank in dust, their shadows long and thin against the ground. Each man carried ghosts now, heavy as gear, but no one spoke them aloud. She led from the front, not because she asked, but because they let her. Even the commander hung back half a step, as though she were the compass now. She didn't want the role, but she knew she couldn't refuse it either. By midday, the relay station rose ahead. A broken tower of steel and rust perched on a ridge, a handful of bunkers at its base, enemy lines dug deep. The last obstacle between them and silence. The commander scanned through binoculars, jaw tightening. "More than we thought." He handed them to her. Through the lens she saw it, sandbags, rifles, movement, dozens at least. Too many for a straight fight. And yet too close to turn back. Her heart beat slow, heavy. The kind of beat that came before choices that rewrote lives. They gathered in the shade of the ridge. Plans whispered, maps scratched in dirt. Arguments flared, died quick. The commander's hand cut the air. "We split 2 fire teams for distraction. The third goes silent through the ravine, plants the charge at the base of the tower. One blast and their eyes go dark." Silence followed. All eyes slid to her. She knew why. She was the one who could make it through, quiet, patient, ruthless enough to finish. She didn't nod, didn't volunteer. But when the commander asked, "Will you take it?" she didn't say no. Because it was already hers. Dusk crawled slow, shadows stretched long, covering their approach. The fire teams peeled off, rifles ready, hearts in their throats. Their job was to die loud enough to let her live quiet. She slid into the ravine, dust soft under her boots, rifle low. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat faded. Only silence remained. The climb was narrow, jagged stone scraping her gloves. Above, enemy voices carried, sharp against the darkening sky. She moved like shadow. Every step measured, every pause eternal. At the top, she saw it, the tower's base, steel struts anchored in concrete, wires humming with stolen signals. And beyond it, guards, 3 of them backs turned, rifles slung, talking, laughing. She froze, every muscle coiled. The knife was in her hand before she thought. But as she crept closer, she saw it. One of the guards was barely older than her daughter, his face soft, his laughter nervous. Not a monster, just a boy in someone else's war. Her chest tightened. She could kill them, she'd done worse. But every life she took weighed heavier now, every silence louder. Her fingers clenched around the knife. And then she exhaled. Not tonight. She ghosted past them, sliding into shadow unseen. At the struts of the tower she knelt, pulling the pack open. The charge gleamed faint in the fading light, a single device, small, deadly, final. Her hands moved with precision, practiced motions born of too many missions. Set the timer, anchor the blast, arm the fuse. Each click echoed in her bones. And then voices close. She flattened against the concrete as two guards rounded the corner, steps heavy. Her rifle was too far, her knife still slick in her hand. But before she could move, one of the guards spoke, low, tired, almost human. You think they'll ever stop sending us out here? The other laughed bitter. Not until the desert eats us, or until someone finally has the guts to cut the line. They moved on, boots crunching gravel. She stayed still long after they were gone. Her chest rose, fell. Her hands shook once, then steadied. The line would be cut, by her. She slipped back toward the ravine. The tower loomed behind her, the charge humming softly in its cradle. And then gunfire. Sharp, close. Her head snapped up. From the ridge below, flashes burst. The fire teams had drawn them out, but the fight had turned. Shouts, screams, the sound of men she knew tearing apart under bullets. Her breath caught. Her legs carried her down the ravine, faster, reckless. At the bottom she saw them, her unit, what was left of it, pinned against stone, firing blind into the dark. The commander was down, blood soaking his sleeve, face pale. His eyes found hers. Is it done? She nodded once. Relief softened his face. He exhaled, almost a smile. Then we made it. He slumped against the rock, still breathing but fatting. She turned her rifle on the ridge, firing, covering, dragging the wounded. Her arms burned, lungs screamed. But the timer in her head ticked louder. 30 seconds. 20. The blast tore the night apart. Light flared white, heat crushing the air. The tower crumpled, steel screaming, wires snapping like broken bones. The ground shook, sand roared. And then silence. Not the silence of suspicion. Not the silence of death. But the silence of a world suddenly blind. The relay was gone. The enemy's eyes gone. And for the first time, victory tasted real. They limped away under the cover of darkness, fewer than they began, fewer still than they deserved. She carried the private's arm over her shoulders, his weight heavy but alive. The commander staggered beside them, jaw clenched against pain. No one spoke, they didn't need to. The desert said it for them. By dawn, they reached the extraction point. The helicopter thundered low, rotors tearing the air. Rescue at last. Men stumbled forward, collapsing into its belly, hands pulling them aboard. She stopped at the edge, sand whipping her face, her rifle heavy in her hands. For a moment she didn't move. The desert stretched endless before her, the graves it had swallowed, the silence it had carved into her. And she thought of her daughter, of the voice waiting on the recorder. She stepped forward, climbing inside. The door slammed, the helicopter lifted. And below, the desert shrank, carrying their ghosts into the endless sand. Hours later, when the engines were silent and the wounded tended, she sat alone. The recorder clicked in her hand. Her daughter's voice spilled soft, faint. "Mom, are you there?" She closed her eyes, chest tightening. For the first time, she answered. "Yes, I'm here." The words were barely a whisper, but they were enough. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't beg, it doesn't explain. It simply acts. And when the smoke cleared, when their chances were gone, she was still standing, carrying silence like a weapon and hope like a flame.